Welcome everybody to the Tuesday work study meeting of January 10th. We will start with the, let's start with pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty, justice for all.
There's an echo. All right, let's have a call or roll call. Director Esner?
Here.
Director Byers? Director Faulkner?
Here.
Director Hudson? Director Moeller?
Here.
Vice President Petra? Here. And President Cuneo?
Here,
And could I have someone vote to excuse Jim? A second? Thank you. Made them. Okay. All right, first on our agenda is the budget update.
Do we need to vote on the motion?
Yes. All in favor to vote for the budget update? Oh, no, all in favor to approve. Thank you. All in favor to approve Director Hudson's absence?
Aye.
All right. First strike. Now, for the budget update.
Thank you. Good evening, Vice President Petra, Board of Education, Dr. Keenan. My name is Jeff Hogger, I'm Chief Operating Officer. This evening, I'll give a brief budget update that will lead into the budget updates coming in February for approval. As you can see, we've kept these four goals as we continue to build the budget: equity, staffing, curricular support, and facilities. And again, as we've talked about, we've brought revenue assumptions. Those have not changed, even as we get more information. So 2023, as we get into next year, will be a reassessment year. Historically, we have increased between $7 to $9 million in local revenue. That's at local tax revenue in those years. We'll have the DESE student adequacy target. Transportation, as of right now, is supposed to be fully funded. That may change with the legislature. They also may change the student adequacy target. Right now it's $6,375 per student. That will hopefully go up. That has not changed in the last 4 years. So with inflation, there'll be some pressure on that. Investment earnings continue to increase. We're looking at about 3.5 to 3.7 million over where we projected to be last year. And then Medicaid revenues will remain the same. We've got our money in for this year already, and that's between that $9 to $10 million range as well. Next slide, please. And again, some expenditure assumptions. Negotiations are starting to gear up. They'll begin here towards the end of January and February. So those changes will come as we decide what percent, or as the board decides what percent that we'd like to increase the salary scales by. Benefits, we don't have a word on it yet, but right now we're looking at about a 3% increase to be safe there. And then disproportionality for last year, we know we'll do that again for next year based on state data, and that'll be anywhere between 5.9 to 6.2 million of our IDEA fund. Next slide, please. And again, as we've done this, we've done zero-based budgeting. We have three main areas: needs, wants, and enhancements. What do we need to provide? A basic curriculum. What do we need to provide? What we're doing right now. And then what enhancements would make what our instruction is better. And then we look at it in three tiers as well. So all partner districts and SSD schools, our disproportionality districts, the 11 there you see on the board, and then the 8 high needs districts as well. Next slide, please. And you see on the screen in front of you 11 tier 2 districts, or districts that receive part of that 5.9 to $6.2 million disproportionality money. But and again, disproportionate schools, they're identified because they're identifying students at a greater rate with a disability, identifying students with particular disability. Students are placed in more restrictive settings that are suspended or expelled at a greater rate than other students or other ethnic groups. And that's what leads districts to be disproportionate. Please. And so as we've talked about, we use 15% of our federal funds. That's right around $40 to $41 million. So that's where we get that 5.9 to 6.2. We're required to identify and address the factors that contribute to disproportionality. We use that disproportionality money to serve students ages 3 through 12th grade cannot solely serve students with disabilities. It needs to serve students with and without disabilities. Next slide, please. And then the last group is our Tier 3 group, and you'll see those 8 schools on the screen there. Next slide. We have based those 8 schools on this heat index map that you have seen before, our distressed community index. The higher that index score, the more distressed or at-risk a community is. And that's based on data based on no high school diplomas, poverty rates, adults not working, housing vacancy rates, median household income, or change in employment or establishments. Next slide, please. And so what we do is we take those 8 districts and we look at their data, so their achievement data, the instructional audits, instructional models, or integrated models of instruction, and then we look at special rate identification and rates of proficiency in reading and math. Next slide, please. And then what we do with that is we base whether or not we need additional materials, additional staffing, more professional development, or more coaching, whether it's literacy, numeracy, or social emotional learning. Next slide, please. And what we've added, this is new for you guys, what we've added is those 8 schools, you'll see where we have added Tier 3 allocations. You see Hancock Place, we've talked about this. They had requested, based on their Tier 3 needs, an additional teacher split between the middle school and high school. Some of those districts you'll see they don't have anything in that Tier 3 allocation because they still have remaining disproportionality funds that we use towards that, and so we're going to exhaust that before we allocate any other money. Hancock's not Tier 2, so we didn't have that money to support, so we supported them through that. But you'll see some of the other money that we've put in, an additional $150,000 to Jennings that supports 2 coaching positions, $200,000 to Riverview Gardens that supports people, it supports their plans. And so that gives you kind of an idea of how we're supporting our Tier 2 and Tier 3 schools. Slide, please. And again, we are looking at resource guides across the district in different areas there, and we're going to continue to do centralized purchasing for curriculum and technology. Next slide, please. And so this brings us to our calendar. And so what we've done is we have wrapped up all the budget requests. We're concluding our meetings now. Our meetings with our districts, or our principals in our schools, took place in December. We're meeting with partner districts now in January, and we'll meet with them throughout February. And we'll meet with the partner district cabinet, superintendent, chief human resource officer, so that they know that the communication is open and they know what's being requested. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, February 14th, we will bring the preliminary budget, and that's going to have the projections for expenditures and revenue. It'll also include staffing, and then we'll go through that on the workshop on the 14th. We'll bring it back on the 28th for preliminary approval so that we can begin hiring those positions that we've requested. Next slide, please. And that concludes the budget presentation. Be more than happy to answer any questions.
Anyone have any questions?
Yes, I have a few. And I'm going to go back to the opening of the, thank you very much. And I'm sure we all appreciate all of the effort in this budget that we are working on to hopefully get done by next month. But I also have some questions regarding our abilities to be more exact in reference to what our efforts produce. And we have those kinds of things in place. First of all, beginning of the report, equity is our #1 goal. Accept that in turn is what we're trying to accomplish here. And so I want to know what areas of this have been approved by our equity director in reference to him looking at this and being able to assure that the money we're spending is going to give us the goal that we say we're trying to accomplish. For the other people involved that will be a part of this in accomplishing that, and what do we have from them that in turn gives us that assurance before we approve a budget with these funds. Another term on page 3, historically increased of $7 to $9 million. That brings about a connection to me in reference to the underservices that oftentimes we find ourselves facing in what we call historically underserved communities. So how are we defining historic? Is that a 5-year period, 10-year period, 2-year period, a 50-year period? So, you know, what data do we have that says that we're not longer, we're taking a different path that in turn brings us to equity that we seek, opposed to just kicking the can down the road for another year or two? These are things that, to me, I would be interested in having information on. Zero-based budget and focus is the title of the next page as we begin to talk about disparities and disproportionalities. Okay? And the reason why we have the disproportionalities is because perhaps we may have had the wrong focus in reference to past efforts. Still has us having to deal with an unequitable situation, particularly when we start talking about certain districts in our county. You know, and I'd like to know how, be able to tell, you know, my folks there, as well as the parents, that we have some assurity that historically underserved is not going to be a continuation after next year. Okay? As I said, in other information with Tier 2 schools, and, you know, we talk about the fact that disproportionality, so we know that it does exist. And we know it does exist, as you say, in racially and ethnic groups. And so I would like to be able to have information that gives me a time as to, from our standpoint of an operation, when did we find ourselves in the category of delivering what now can be termed as historically underserved in the North County community? You know, I'm sure that since the time that we first started in 1957, that there have been periods to where that historical underserved term was not in use. So when did we begin to fit the criteria that allows that historical underserved to now be a reality that we find ourselves facing as an organization? You know, 41 million has been mentioned, about 15% amount of money that we are kind of putting into the situation. And, you know, in all times, it's not about putting money in the situation to be able to resolve it. It requires a whole lot more involvement and a focus. As on the previous page, we talked about there being a zero-based budget, which also, and it said and apparently a zero focus, to the point to where we actually find ourselves faced with being a part of that historical underserved group in that capacity. Moving on, when we get to budget focus and equity, again, I happen to notice, does anyone notice who did the redistricting for our districts now? No?
Who did the redistricting?
The redistricting map?
For our sub-districts?
Yeah, for our sub-districts. Isn't that changed?
We had a committee that did that.
Right, and who was on that committee? Because what you look at here is that the only two districts that are no longer contiguously structured are Hazelwood and I would say Rockwood, because now Rockwood has Lake, and it's a huge district, and you know, and I think that you know, I'd like to know what the school of thought was in reference to that.
There's a criteria that's set for the sub-districting.
But what is it, and what is it supposed to produce in reference to the unification of the community?
The intent is to make sure that when we look at a governing council member,
Mm-hmm.
and the representation of the number of individuals who are in being represented. So
Right.
it's based on a census, so every time we have a census, the next year after that, that's when we have to look at the districts, make sure that there is an equalization of the vote.
Well,
So-
equalization is one thing, equity is something different.
But that's how the criteria is.
Yeah, I understand the criteria, but it also poses that question, because at the end of the day, the community that in turn is the history of being historically underserved that we're dealing with, the disproportionality, That situation is of concern because what happens in that situation is that the distance between the communities, as we unfortunately find is a reality here, that, you know, in the situation of Clayton, an individual can be elected in Clayton and represent Rockwood and have absolutely no school of thought about the issues that Rockwood face, or that they have an investment in Rockwood. And so same thing, when we separate where we now create those kinds of social changes in a redistricting plan. It may create by number only a certain amount of equality, but it does not lend itself to us gaining equity, because at the end of the day, there has to be consistency in reference to the involvement, the history, with individuals who are represented here on this board. You know, you can have changes that can be so drastic and that nothing ever gets done because there's a lack of consistency. And we can say that about a lot of different things, but I think our concern is about us as an institution and certain stability that we have to bring to the table to accomplish equity. You know, there can be individuals who may not have the knowledge of some of the board members who have been here now. And when they come in, then now it's starting all over again, and you don't know where you've been in the past to be able to prevent from going around in a circle to get back there again. So I'm just saying those things are concerns. So whoever it was that did that redistricting, when you look at that, that could be considered gerrymandering. And the purposes in that situation.
I think we need to give Jeff the chance to respond to what you're saying, and I think rather than just talking, we need to ask questions and let him answer, and then tell us what information he can come back to us with.
Okay, because I was looking at other questions too, you know, around support.
You've talked for a while, let's let him respond.
Okay.
Perfect, thank you. In regards to the equity review, we reviewed that as a cabinet. So we spent probably an hour and 15 hours and 20 minutes the other day just reviewing personnel requests and budget requests. And so Dr. Macklin is part of that cabinet member. So we sit there and we review those as a team. Superintendent, Ms. Moore, Mr. Boyd. So we review, all of those as we do that. So that equity piece is there in the review process. With the historical numbers, we review 10 to 12 years of tax rate data, what the assessed value looks like and what that comes in. So that's why we know at that historical level, we'll see an increase between that 7 to 9 million in a reassessment year and 3 million in a non-reassessment year. So we look at data that goes pretty far back. In regards to the underserved, that's where we do have that zero-based budgeting, and that's why we have the tiers, so that we can have those school districts in those tiers request exactly what they need to serve their populations in their school districts. So that zero-based doesn't come from us saying you have X amount of dollars. It comes and it says, tell us what you need, and when we can support that, we'll give you that money. And so then with tier 2, we use our disproportionality money for that, and with tier 3, that's where we really to identify and serve those districts as well in tier 3, where they request different items they need, as far as different teachers, different resources. And so that's where we really focus on those underserved populations. And then that $41 million, it's the disproportionate fund. That's the IDEA money we receive. We spend that 15%. But what we do is to really get an understanding of the district. We don't want to go in and tell a district, this is what we think you should do. We allow those districts to build those disproportionality plans so that they have a really good idea of, one, of their data, and two, what needs to be done for their students. And then they come back and then we fund that money with that $41 million.
Which is required by the SSD.
If I may just ask a clarifying question, it is up to those school districts to decide how they want to use those funds. In other words, we make suggestions, but we may not dictate to them.
It's really designed to make sure that they utilize these funds for gen ed students so that they're not referring students to special ed. It's designed that we're just like the gate, we're like the flow through, but we don't dictate how the plans go. They've got guardrails on what you can use the money for. They've got criteria around it from DESE, and we have to submit our, each plan to DESE, but they're in charge of that money. Each district is, that's identified.
It's out of our hands.
Exactly. We are not, we don't decide what they do.
We don't decide the plan.
No.
But at what point, since we in fact supply personnel that we find ourselves having a difficult time in supplying, paras and teachers in those school districts, they may have a plan, but if in fact that there's not the kind of support that we're able to guarantee happening, then whatever their plan is going to be subject to whether it works.
They do their own hiring of their staff.
So the numbers that we have that are short of being able to meet the requirement of paras and teachers that we supply, are you saying then that doesn't exist any longer with us? It only exists with them?
So disproportionality funds are different. We provide them the amount of money that they qualify for. They decide their plan. Some have professional development, some have staffing like social workers, MTSs, interventionists. They hire those people. We just give them the money.
So are you saying that the money then that we're given is going to make up for the shortages of personnel and staff that we have the abilities to give in our portion of the deal?
That has nothing to do, they're two different sides of the street.
How is that two different sides?
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm listening here, and the thing that I find striking is that when I looked at the high index districts, especially when you looked at the six, because two of them, they didn't need the money because they had something else. So those, if you look at that six on those slides, those are the ones that we are completely understaffed on. Those are the ones where we staff it, but we have the openings. Can we somehow link those two together? That would be nice. Like, I know we talked before about possibly on individuals that are, it's not that we haven't put the position there, but we can't get people to stay there. Could we use disproportionality monies? And I don't know this, but could that be used to have a stipend for individuals that are working in that district?
It's to be utilized for non-special education students. And so it's to be utilized to support staffing in those districts for general education students. So when you're looking at the staffing that we work with our partner districts for special education, that's a separate, different group of individuals that we hire. And then these positions, through the disproportionality, are paid for by those districts. I
thought disproportionality could be used if you had a higher number of children with disabilities suspended, if a higher percentage of disabilities that were suspended were expelled. I thought that monies could be used toward that. I thought then it could also be used in addition to non-disabled students. Isn't that correct?
The primary goal for general education initiatives for interventions for non-special education students.
I guess I do have another clarifier. I want to make sure. So the way I've always conceptualized our disproportionality funds, the way that in I guess most likely a legal definition, this is money that comes through the IDEA grants. The designation, whether a district has disproportionality issues, is defined by DESE, it's not defined by us.
Exactly.
That money must go to those districts, and it's up to those districts to decide. In terms of the board's decision-making ability or power, or really SSDs, really all we can do is identify the funds and make sure that they are provided to the school districts. We have no control about how that's being spent. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, control and influence are two different things.
Fair enough, but again, it's my understanding that I think my opinion about this would be that when it comes to how we are trying to address those kinds of concerns, I don't think the disproportionality funds are, are the board's best use of attention. In other words, I think it is up for SSD to work with those other, with our school districts who are identified as disproportionate, as having disproportionality, the best use of that money. But I don't think that, I think we have other avenues to approach what I believe are the concerns that you're expressing, as opposed to with the disproportionality.
And if we do, again, the first goal that we have listed is obtaining equity. Not talking about it, but obtaining it. And even though we have partners that we have to work with, we also have to know that just like we are attempting to guarantee certain resources, that there has to be people in place on their particular plan. Because, you know, they have to have, you know, what's the difference between a need and a plan? You said they present to us based upon their need. But it's the plan that they in turn are using the funds for. Is there a unified plan that gives everyone the sense that we will, as an institution of our particular position, accomplish the number one goal that we stated, which is equity? And so to that point, then I think that there are other dynamics that are involved that we should also consider and be able to have that as a part of our action plan. Because we've got, just like they said, they research certain things, and I asked historically, so when did our particular services become a part of the historical underserved conversation?
Can I interject a little bit? If we focus on slide 12, does slide 12 not does that not encapsulate what you're referring to as far as additional supports and help that our district can provide to high needs areas?
Talking about District 3 funding?
Yeah, and can we focus
Tier 3
on,
funding?
Yeah, the Tier 3 funding.
Well,
that to me means,
how does it go about, my question that I wrote was, how does it support and does equity equal accomplishment? And in reference to those same funds. You know, I can see that we were given funds, but, you know, we also understand, as I said earlier, we have experienced the fact that we still have equity to accomplish, that throwing money at a situation without these other particular pieces of information being a part of our use of the money doesn't guarantee us that we're doing the right thing to change the dynamics of historically underserved. Okay, I mean, and that's with us as an organization, because that equity piece is the first thing on our agenda. And as I said, are we simply doing things that ends up at the end of time, 2 years from now, another year from now? That's a box check that we did because we implemented the procedures that DESE says. DESE ain't in North County trying to in turn create a stable tax base. So we have to understand the dynamics of what it is that we are doing. And we have to take in those considerations, in my opinion.
So I know I didn't read it at the beginning of this meeting, but for every work study meeting, every presenter gets 20 minutes and every board gets 20 minutes to ask questions. So let's open it up to somebody. Does anybody else have any questions?
I think you're right, we need to move on, be respectful of the time, and we considered our time. Curtis has brought up some concerns that we're going to have to circle back and address, and I think Jeff is taking great notes, and we'll support him in addressing those. But going down the rabbit hole of the disproportionality funds, I agree with you all that we're not putting our best use of our bandwidth in the place where we can have the most effect. So we need to have a discussion on what we can do to have the most effect of what we have control over. I don't want to lose that focus. I think Jeff presented exactly what he needed to present, and we understand it, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have a question, just
Okay,
real quick.
one last thing before we leave, disproportionality. Jeff, I am going on the grounds that what you're saying is correct and that your slides were correct. But your slides say that for a comprehensive CEIS, they're allowed to use those to serve students ages 3 through 12 with or without disabilities. So it can be used with individuals with disabilities. It does have the thing on it that says may not serve only children with disabilities. So in other words, kids with disabilities can use these funds as well as kids without disabilities. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I must to comment on that piece of it because we feel that we have the obligation to support the students with disabilities and to be able to provide this. The disproportionality funds, we believe, which we've been working with each one of the 11 districts, they have come up with their own plan to own what they want to be able to do and to achieve with this money. Really, to support them through the models that they've developed so that they can work with their students. Now, it's not solely just with special ed, and it's not solely with gen ed, but it's primarily interventions to support general education students so that there's a referral process. We can provide additional information on the disproportionality, but I also agree that when you look at the clear budget between Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, the $5 or $6 million that we're talking about that the districts are working on, that is a very small percentage of the overall budget that we're providing on a daily basis to our 22 districts. The majority of it is within our first tier, which is our special education staffing, which are working with all the directors and all the superintendents on that. And then the Tier 3 really is to look at how can we support additional efforts that they feel that they want to work with us on. So when we look at equity, we are looking at not just a one-size-fits-all. We're working it in 3 different ways so that we are able to make sure that we're looking at every district and understand where their needs are at and being able to support them for the special ed, for the equity pieces around the disproportionality, and also in terms of the high needs areas so that we can provide additional literacy supports and coaching and those types of things.
I think then we should add I'm not saying that we can't do that. I think as a board or as a district, make that decision. What I'm saying is we should put a slide in saying that we as a district feel that it is most important to use this monies on individuals in these districts that do not have specific disabilities, because that's a board's decision.
Did you have any other questions, Dr. Cuneo?
No.
Okay. My last quick question. When they're given a dollar amount for, let's say, the 22-23 school budget year, $1 million, because it's my fair number, do they have to spend all that million that year, or can they save $200,000 for the next year? Is it that million is for that school year, or, okay.
For that fiscal year, and then that's where that zero base comes in nicely.
Right.
Because then they can say, okay, we only spent 800, but next year we're gonna spend 1.2, and they put that request in.
Gotcha. Okay. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't,
You don't lose that.
well, not just lose it, but saving, or almost like.
It does not carry over.
Carryover, that's the word. Okay. Any other questions?
Pardon me, but I'm curious about slide 7. I know we've had a breakdown by partner districts of the needs and services provided for in the different districts. Do we have a breakdown? Is it on those? Is it on that framework that we have a breakdown of our disproportionality? How disproportionality is, how a district qualifies for it? Like breakdown of those bullet points. Do we have those numbers provided to us? Can we, if we haven't already? I'm searching for a reminder or a refresh if that's already been provided.
So we get a general number from the state for us, and then that is what we utilize to use those 11 districts that are identified. I'll do some research and I'll get you some numbers.
Appreciate
Get you a greater explanation.
We got that in the Friday packet, maybe? Yeah. Like how, in what ways each district qualifies?
Yeah,
Yeah.
some different.
Beautiful. All right, thank you so much. And I think you're up next for all of them. 2.02, the maintenance 5-year plans.
Good evening, Vice President Potroff, Board of Education, Dr. Keenan. My name is Jeff Hogg, Chief Operating Officer for the Special School District. With me this evening is Toby Klotzfelder, our Director of Facilities and Operations. He's going to go over the main part of the 5-year plan for our maintenance facilities. But prior to turning the mic over to Toby, I just want to thank him and his team. They are absolutely amazing with what they do. Whether it is, something broken in a building, or they're in early when we're clearing lots. What they do is selfless. They came in over break when we had some things that needed to be cleaned up, and without hesitation, they were in on Christmas Eve. So, just kind of one of those cool things. about the expectation he's set with his team and how good they are. So I'll turn it over now, and the mic is all yours.
Wow. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
This is going into our second year of the 5-year plan. On, next slide, please. Our structure has not changed. It's still 2 managers, 2 leads, and 16 staff. We maintain 22 SSD buildings. That includes all the outbuildings and shops. And next slide, please. We currently maintain over 1 million square feet under roof, and we have added around 50,000 square feet this last building season. Mechanical, HVAC, electrical maintenance is something that we take care of every single day. We're also in charge of custodial services, which has been a challenge with the new company, but we're working on improvements. Grounds, we have added 9 acres to the grounds department. We do not take care of the lawn mowing, but we do take care of tree lines, mulching, cutting down trees, fence lines, snow removal. This year so far has been really good for snow removal, but I suspect February, March will be ugly. We do plan and execute all the major capital projects. And I'll let Jeff say a few words about funding on that.
Yeah, and so we have 3 sources for the funding of our capital projects. Generally, anything under $1,000 or a refresh of paint or a new coat of paint or a little upkeep here and there is from our general revenue. Then when we get into capital projects, which is building a new garage or, adding on to a building, that's our capital projects funds. That's that 6 cents tax and fund for that we put in to fund those buildings. You can only build out of that when you're gonna talk about a big building or a renovation. You can only do that out of that fund 4. And so that's why when people say, why don't you just take some money and go do this? You can't, because it's only allocated out of that fund 4, or the capital projects fund. And then every once in a while, DESI will offer one-time money. Like this year, we're able to do some playgrounds and some building projects and some renovations through this ARP money. So those are the 3 major funding sources for our maintenance facilities and our capital projects.
Next slide, please. So we have started off with a bang. This is our first year of our 5-year plan. We're just now wrapping up. South Tech and the office and security remodel has just finished up. We just got our inspection today on the elevator, which was holding up our finalizing the project. New Bridges was also remodeled. That was a little over 10,000 square foot remodel of one of our old shops, and they've all been moved in, and I see nothing but smiles there. C Hall was something that we kind of added on top and got done for Applied Tech. I'm kind of proud of that one. Our vendors and in-house maintenance staff did that entire project from beginning to end, and I think it's been a great addition to North Tech. We also did Litsker and Southview playgrounds, which I think have been wonderful projects to be involved with. And we have broken ground on Central Garage. Next slide, please. On Central Garage, there's some pictures of South Tech front entrance and the security entrance. I didn't have any other pictures at that point to add, but next slide, please. Playgrounds, these are both at Southview, and Litsker playground is very similar, a little bit different dynamics for the kids there. Next slide, please. The picture to the left is the old shop that is now the New Bridges. That one was almost completed at that point. It has been completed now. To the right is Applied Tech. That's an area within South Tech that was kind of remodeling for just Dennis Mix and his program, Dr. Mix. So going into year 2 of our plan, we're going to restart, I should say, the planning for central office renovation. We are currently working on Central Garage. It should be done December of this year, maybe January if things go well. Long lead items will always be a problem with projects of that size. We are always looking at replacing asphalt and permeable concrete when we're able within our funding. And then we are currently designing a dental lab for North Tech in one of the old shops there, and we hope to have that launched here in the next 30, 40 days. and finish before academic school year starts in the fall. We also are looking at a Lidsger and Ackerman roof replacements. For the year 3 continuing, we should be finishing up hopefully at that time the central office renovation, and we'll start looking at other projects and things that are needed at that time, small projects, shop remodels. We're continuing to try doing one north and one south every year if possible. Year 4, we should have central office renovation done. We are looking at large infrastructure problems with sewage, mechanical, electrical, plumbing issues in all of our schools. And we're working on a catastrophic failure plan for facilities. We're asking ourselves the hard questions. What would happen if a sprinkler pipe broke, or sewage system backup, or a fire for that matter? And we did have a sprinkler break and electrical panel switchgear go out at South Tech over the holidays, one Christmas Eve and one in between the holidays. And our team reacted within 13 minutes, I think, to Litzinger, and we were able to come in and stop a fire potentially with the switchgear at South Tech. But with this planning, what we'd like to do is have a handbook literally available at each of the schools where, if I'm not there, if Dr. Hogg isn't available, who do we call? What vendors we might need to put this plan in motion. So that's what we're working on in that review. Next slide, please. This is kind of repetitive, but we're just going to be looking at small projects and large projects that may come, but mainly infrastructure. We have aging schools, and we're aware of it, so we're trying to forecast where the next problem may be, and that's difficult, but we're working on that with our planning. Next slide, please. Questions?
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes. I have one question. Sure. Regarding the year 4 and I just recently mentioned the reviewing catastrophic failure planning. It sounds very important. I'm curious why is it a year 4 thing as opposed to something that, perhaps should be reviewed?
I got to be honest with you. After reading it, it's not in the right spot.
Okay. Thank you.
We're working on it right now and hope to have it completed within the year. So, yeah. That was my somewhere in there, put it in the wrong spot.
Thank you very much for this report. How do I don't want to mess the name up, Calder?
Cloudfilter?
Cloudfilter, okay.
Like Smith the Dipper.
Okay. In this particular 5-year overview that you've given us, am I to understand that equity is a part of this particular desire as well?
So we base everything that we do on the building itself's needs, because I just turned 60 in November. North Tech is 58 years old. So if it needs new plumbing, new panels, I base it on the most need at each building itself.
Okay. Well, I guess my question may have been incorrect in that particular time, but when I mentioned about the equity, how much are we looking at these particular activities of spending being? Most of this is money that we're spending. Some of it, for example, on the page when you've got the responsibilities of upkeeping maintenance over 1.2 million square feet of school, and we've got grounds and maintenance fees and different custodial services. And earlier, Dr. Hogg gave us information in reference to our percentages of individuals who fit that category of historically being underserved. And so to that point, we're spending a lot of money here, and we have a lot of different work that's being done that costs. So we're spending a certain amount of money to accomplish all of this over the next 5 years. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So do we have equity figures in reference to that spending that we have as goals as well?
I'm not qualified to answer that question as far as the equity end of it. I do look at it just from a mechanical, electrical, plumbing view. As far as the curriculum, what might go into those spaces, that's not part of my expertise.
I understand.
Jeff, you want to update on that?
Jeff may be able to answer that.
Yeah, and so as we look and as we do those pieces, we really try to see where the biggest needs are, how many students will impact, and then where we're looking at. So for instance, we were up in North County with Ackerman and then North County Tech, and then we went to South County Tech. So we really identify where those major needs are, and then we proportion the money, we budget the money to it so that we can address it. When it comes to facilities, we're looking at safety first, and we're looking at need and impact. And then we address those, we put our money there, and then we build our plan off of that. And that's why we're always talking to principals to see what's needed in their buildings. And if it is something at Southview, and it's something we can do, or if it's going to impact the number of students, we go ahead and get it done. Or we look and see what they need at Ackerman, or at Northview, North Tech, and then we go ahead and attack the problems that way.
Okay. Well, and again, I can understand that, but again, it doesn't necessarily address the questions I asked, because we're talking about actions that cost and we're spending money to perform, and some of those are outsourced, many of those are outsourced in their facilitations. Is that right?
He's asking about the contract.
Yes, and
Yeah.
so then, and yes, and then we have that, we have the MBE, we have the WVE portion of our.
Do we have an equity plan for the money that we're spending? I understand about the contract, but again, going back to us, let's just use hypothetical. We're gonna spend $10 million.
Okay.
How much of that has been designated for accomplishing the goals of equity within that particular context of spending?
We don't have a number set aside for that.
So therefore, this particular aspect of our operations is not governed by the same equity principles.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. Like,
I'm sure.
what, he's talking about buildings, not, so.
We're talking about maintenance costs that in turn it takes.
Right.
Okay,
when
so you have to
funds
have-
Be updated, they update.
So you have companies and you have individuals who in turn are implementing the services within the maintenance structure, is that correct?
Well, so is your question about the contractors that we hire, or is your question?
My question is about the equity piece being a portion of this particular aspect of our operations.
Again, if you could be more specific, is that about who we hire to do our big projects, or when?
Well,
you
that becomes
decide
a
what-
portion of it in reference to making decisions. But I ask, and we're talking about a 5-year plan, right? So that 5 years has a budget. We know we're gonna spend over the next 5 years to do these things, we're gonna spend X amount of dollars. It's gonna cost us in some kind of form of capacity, a certain amount of money to do this.
Right.
So, if it's our money we're spending, and it's our particular goals as to being equity, then our spending should be as equally important as everything else that we attach equity to. We have to be consistent, and I think, in our approach in reference to, just like I mentioned a while ago when I kind of mentioned about zero budget, zero focus, then I think that we have to have a holistic focus in everything that we involve ourselves in. And so we're spending over the next 5 years X amount of dollars, and whatever that figure may be, per year, it costs us X amount of dollars to execute this particular plan. How much of that money that we're spending, and whatever that total is there a percentage that we have set aside out of that then becomes a part of our equity goals?
Correct me if I'm wrong, when it, like you said, it's safety in buildings.
So safety and equity don't necessarily come into play.
I guess,
Because
could you give an example of what you would like to see that isn't?
And that's what I'm asking. Have we considered in that focus, because equity is what we're saying that we want to represent as an institution.
Do you not see equity in this stuff?
I just asked the question, I didn't get any answer that there was any particular percentage of money that we're spending in reference to black contractors, in reference to people who in turn have, I have not.
Okay, so it's a specific question. We're trying to get stuff.
Right, and I just tried to make it simple by saying, okay, if we're spending $10 million a year, what percentage of that $10 million is a part of equity that we're going to make sure gets into the hands of the historically underserved people?
Okay, that last part is new.
But I thought that was understood when I talked about equity, I'm sorry.
No, and I think that the broad stroke language you were using is hitting everyone differently. So I think when Jeff hears it, he thinks one thing. I think when Mr. Clausholder hears it, he hears one thing. I think when I hear it, I think one thing. So I think what Katie's trying to get at is, what specific question do you want answered? And what I think I hear, but correct me if this is not what you're intending, is can we put a number? Can we put a percentage? Can we put a rate of this, in this budget, this is what's being directed toward equity? And I think that's important because perhaps my definition of equity in our facilities management may be different from yours. So
Well, that's the reason why we first.
Let me finish.
Okay. I'm
So when
sorry.
you're asking for a number, that's one thing that Jeff can provide. When I'm looking at equity in our facilities management, I'm falling on the side of safety. I want to make sure that our oldest and our buildings in most need are getting funding first. To me, that's equity. That can be different definitions. But what I think we're trying to get at is what piece of information would be helpful for you, and then how do we mirror that with what pieces of information will be helpful for us? So I think, like, for me, it's the needs-based question, right? But for you, if it's the
Well, and to
percentage
me,
or
it's the
number.
same thing. The need becomes, as I said, we're going to do this. Now, in doing this, we're going to spend a certain amount of money in doing it. And in spending that money, then we also have equity as a part, which we started off with. We had to first come up with a definition for equity, as I can remember, a couple of years ago, so we could be on the same page. But we have a certain amount of money and a certain amount of people who are going to be utilized in accomplishing this particular 5-year objective.
So do you want to know, like, monetarily, what amount of money or what
That's what I said.
percentage?
What percentage
No,
of the
no,
total
but-
amount of money
but it-
have we set
Okay,
aside
so
within that?
that's one question.
Yes.
Or are we looking at our WBE and MBE business, and what percentage of that? Is that another number that you would like to see?
Well, I think that those scenarios break out differently.
I agree.
Yeah, they break out
Like,
differently.
I'm just trying to get at
yeah,
what
yeah.
you want to see.
Yes.
And I think I would say another piece of information that would be helpful is when we're looking at our different buildings, and we're
Mhm.
looking at the rate of need of each of those buildings. I
Mhm.
think we've obviously identified some here that are more needy than others. But it'd be great to see a sort of like a spectrum of, between this school and that school and that school, here's where they are needs-wise.
Mhm.
Here's how old they are, here's what updates they need.
Right.
That would be helpful, and then for me, for an equity perspective. So I just think we got to be very specific
Yeah.
about what we want to see. So I think if anyone else wants to see something specific out of this, we got to let them know.
You would like to speak towards the 15%.
Yeah, and so as we get through the bigger projects, thank you, as we get into our bigger projects that we put out for bid, we do have that 15% that we have our general contractors put towards maybe and subcontractor work. And so that is one number that you could put towards the number that we're expending. So if we have a project that we put out to bid, we do require that 15% of that work goes to maybe organizations.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I'm not going to belabor this, but I will turn back to your first report. When we talked about disproportionality, the phrase racial or ethnic group was a part of that rationale. I think that translates in equity across the board that becomes different than just saying WBE, MBEs, and things of that nature. Because those don't necessarily oftentimes represent a racial or ethnic specific that has been historically underserved. So therefore, my question was simply one as to, how much money of this, how many people are we looking to try to do in accomplishing equity who come from that racially ethnic group of historically disproportionality?
I have a thought and perhaps a request. We have an equity director. Would you please take a look at how we are spending money, obviously not today, but take a look at how we're spending money. My question would be, for example, are we, I would be most concerned, for example, if the district is putting money towards schools or buildings that are servicing some student populations versus others. And I want to make sure that we have a system that is equitable. and fair. And I will say that I want to be very clear, I agree with the statement that we really need to look at student safety first and the needs of the buildings, but I want to make sure that when we're looking at it, we're not, for example, looking at certain districts or certain areas of town before we look at others. And would that be appropriate for you to help us out with that?
Yes.
Thank you. That's my suggestion perhaps on how to address that.
I would also like to, perhaps propose, and my interpretation of the needs and pressing, concerns that you were relaying to us. I mean, I feel like I am in tune with what you're saying.
Okay.
For North County in particular. So per that point, slide 11 mentions beginning infrastructure planning for both tech campuses. So my curiosity is when it comes to the North Tech campus, and this is an area that you're addressing more so, is there a way, if it's identified as being a need to begin planning for that North Tech campus, is there a way that possibly we could bump that up in priority to have perhaps address some of the concern you're speaking of?
Didn't we already renovate North Tech campus?
We renovated North Tech first and then.
First,
like a
we
year
did the
ago.
renovations of that
Did that.
already. Those are completed.
Yes.
Okay, so what is this reference then? Begin infrastructure planning for both tech?
That'd be plumbing, electrical, switchgear, big mechanical equipment, roof equipment.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Those things that sometimes get overlooked, we, as a facility person, we see them because that's what keeps us up at night, worrying about things breaking. Not the pretty, not the carpet, not the things that, the kids see.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I'll just close my statements on this, as it pertains to needs, as you mentioned, Meredith. The need, and I'll just use this, if there's a need to fix the plumbing, a black plumber can suffice for the need of repair as well as anyone else can. So that's the reason why that my particular statement might have been broad in reference to just saying, okay, let's just look at the total picture of money. We say, okay, we're going to spend this amount of money out of that. Therefore, then that becomes a goal in our being able to create the employment, share those dollars in reference to community outreach. All of those kinds of things come into play simply by being able to keep the focus, in my mind, on equity at every aspect of our particular operations and for the sums of money that we find ourselves capable of utilizing in providing the services, the needs to our children and our community.
Are there any other questions before I do mine? Dr. Cunha, do you have any other questions? before I do mine?
No. Thank you for the enlightening discussion.
I have a quick question about the roof. Just because I remember that summer when we did the roof, it was 5-6 years ago. It was really hot in June. It was one of those really hot June months or years. Did we not do the whole roof, or do roofs only last 5-6 years?
No, they last between 20 and 30 years, but our roofs are so big. What you do is you never do an entire roof at a time, or 2 or 3 at a time. You do sections. Otherwise, what'll happen is in 30 years, you'll have this huge bill for a lot of roofs.
Oh,
Okay.
We have a system that we go through with infrared cameras, and we check out all the roofs of all the districts, and then decide which ones are the most needy, literally, that are leaking the most and have water underneath their subsurface.
Okay, I just happen to remember them up there, 20-degree heat, thinking,
I'll keep doing it every year.
yeah. All right, any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, now we're gonna go to the transportation 5-year plan.
All right, good evening, Vice President Batra, Board of Education, Dr. Keenan. My name is Jeff Hogg, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Special School District. With me this evening is Kenny Mulder, our Director of Transportation. And everything we said about how good facilities and maintenance is, we can echo that with our bus drivers as well. What they do for our students, getting them to and from school, rain, shine, snow, is just absolutely amazing. So I will turn it over to Kenny and let him walk you guys through this presentation.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening. Next slide, please. Transportation overview, transportation services are available to all students attending SSD managed schools and programs, including separate public schools, career technical education schools, and vocational training programs. The department oversees 2 in-house locations, our central garage and our south garage, and we have our contracted north location. STA, Student Transportation of America, is our service provider there. Also oversee transportation partnership agreements with Parkway, Melville, Kirkwood school districts. They provide transportation for our students in those districts. As well as 2 alternative transportation companies. We've increased that since I put this together. We now have 4 companies that we utilize because of driver shortages throughout those companies. We had to extend it out to additional companies. Next slide. So our snapshot, we have 2 managers, 4 supervisors, 3 safety trainers, 5 technicians, 2 fuelers, 5 dispatchers, 137 drivers, of which we still have 11 open positions. Monitors, so we have 108 board approval positions, 20 of those being open, and 2 secretarial positions. Next slide, please. A routing snapshot. South Garage has 52 routes, Central Garage has 51 routes, North Garage has 95 routes, Parkway runs 21 routes, Melville 12 routes, Kirkwood 6 routes, and then we also have 56 cab or alternative transportation services we provide to students. Next slide, please. Snapshot of our vehicles. Type A are our small vans. We have 71 straight vans, 13 lift-equipped vans. All of our vehicles now have air conditioning and white roofs so that we can keep our kids cool. Type C, which is conventional type bus, we have 18 straight buses and 95 lift buses, and we have 8 service vehicles with an average fleet age of 5 years. So our accomplished goals for this year is implementation of our parent application. All the programs are now communicating with each other. We rolled that out in November. We do have a lot of parents that are utilizing that. With driver shortages and things, sometimes it does get a little complicated or confusing because as we combine routes or merge routes for the day, sometimes that information gets pushed out isn't accurate. But once we're fully staffed, that program will be much better. We work with HR director on our new recruiting and hiring process. So since January of 2022, we've hired 25 drivers and 21 monitors. So this current year, we began the construction of the new central garage, as Toby talked about. We're going to continue to determine the most effective advertising system to attract new hires. We've got a lot of good hits and employees that we've hired through Indeed, so that's been working well for us. Train all pertinent staff on transportation data collection, and then we ordered, and you guys approved for the purchase of 25 buses. Unfortunately, those orders were canceled. They're just not available. The units are not available this year, so we may have to look at restructuring something for next year when it comes to buses. Establish electronic access for required transportation forms. So currently, we're utilizing tablets for student ridership, our pre- and post-trips inspections, and our mileage. And next year, we hope to have our student referral process in there for the beginning of the 23-24 school year. Next slide, please. Year 2, and it's our goal currently too, is obtain a fully staffed workforce, establish community development standards for student travel training, construction on the new transportation facility, review of contracted services, move into the new transportation facility, and hope to purchase 25 new buses for $2,775,000. And that's, again, an increase from what you see in the slide before. The bus costs are extremely high right now. So I'm hoping we'll see a decrease, but not promising. Next slide, please. Year 3, upgrade outdated maintenance equipment, and we do that as we go. We fully upgraded our lifts and things like that about 3 years ago, so we want to make sure we're continuing to look at that, replacement schedules and things like that. Review of contract for partnership agreements for efficiencies economically, and again, purchase another 25 units. That's kind of our average yearly replacement cycle to keep the depreciation cycles together. Slide, please. Year 4, review current training modules for compliance, update, revise, and modify if needed, and then again, the purchase of the 25 buses that we talked about, 2 and 3. Next slide, please. Year 5, review of transportation software upgrades, routing, maintenance driver, and monitor safety and training. Doug and his team and I are working on that right now, potentially looking at doing this next school year. And again, purchase 25 buses. Next slide, please. Questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So we did not get our 25 buses that we were hoping to get this year.
Correct. We've had some people contact us about some chassis that became available, but they're going so fast. By the time we put a new RFP together, we wouldn't lose that bank.
In order to maintain our fleet, we're attempting to replace 25 buses per year. Do we need to increase that number to make up for the 25 that we didn't get this year, to say by an extra 6 or 7 per year for the next?
Hopefully. My understanding is there may be some struggles to get the Type A, the van, next year as
So
well.
we may not be able to get 25 next year as well.
Correct.
All right.
Dan Cuneo, I have following up on Dr. Asner's questions. I remember a previous time when you presented, it was 25 every year, 25 buses because of the lifespan of the buses. What will this do to our maintenance costs, and will this screw up the constant 25?
It will. Eventually, we'll have to look at seeing if we can slide a few buses in yearly, and you might see our maintenance costs go up as we have to replace transmissions, engines, rear ends, try to replace the buses before we get to that point where we're having these high-end, an engine for a bus is $25,000. That's not something we budget because, we maintain a newer fleet so that we don't have to do that.
And that's probably the saving grace in this, is that we do have a newer fleet.
Yep.
We have a fleet that's 5 years old on average, which you really don't get into those costs, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you don't get into those major costs until you're a few more years out. So what you guys have allowed us to do with purchasing new buses in that large quantity every year, will save us in times like this, when we may not be able to get the 25 buses next year. And then we create that plan of how we're going to build that back up in that capacity to keep that right around that 5-year average. But that's the nice part, is we're not in a world of hurt right now, as long as we create that plan to build out.
We rotate out our small vans every 7 years, and then our bigger buses are on a 10-year rotation cycle. So that's where the 25-year. We have a 200 bus fleet, so we try to keep that rotating out 25 buses a year so that we can maintain that 5 years.
Any other questions? Go. On page number 5, the service vehicles, 8 of those, what are those used for? So
that is shop trucks. We have 3 safety supervisors that are out on the roads observing drivers as they're out on routes, things like that. So that's what
Not students.
Correct.
That's where I was.
Yep.
Question mark. Okay. Any other questions, guys? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do you feel that this, the buses, that you'll be able to purchase them, it'll get a little bit back to normal in the next couple of years, or you feel like this is kind of the new trend?
I hope. Yeah, I think it's going to be a new trend. The push is really electric. We've looked at electric, and the problem being with electric, they're not really developing for our purposes. And that is, we run a lot of lift buses. Most of our buses have 2 air conditioning units. Currently now, with a bus with a non-lift, non-air conditioned, they're getting about 120 miles out of that cycle. And then if you take cold weather, kind of like we have in the Midwest, that's going to take that in half. The other thing is cost. We've looked at cost. I can buy a Type C bus, which is a conventional open-hood bus, right now for about $120,000. Those buses are about $450,000.
Whoa.
But the problem is, the expectancy is not any more than the 10 years. So we're not going to gain by, other than being compliant with, EPA and things like that. But we may be pushed to go to that point, and we'll have to talk about money.
Okay.
So yeah, my $2.7 million will be $14 million, so it's very challenging, and I'm not sure what the future will bring, but that might be the direction we're looking at.
Thank you.
All right, last but not least, paraprofessional and hourly student services salary alignment.
Good evening, Vice President Potroff, Board of Directors, Dr. Keenan, I'm Philip Boyd, Chief People and Culture Officer for SSD. And tonight I'm going to present on paraprofessional and hourly student services salary realignment. One of the things that we've been doing is trying to make sure that we are paying attention to issues like pay, like benefits, so that we can impact. One of the things that we found was that because of different cycles of negotiations, we have a significant number of paraprofessionals that actually have not had the opportunity to have the years of experience aligned with the pay schedule. We found this to be problematic, and it also as competitive as we can be in terms of retaining and recruiting paraprofessionals. We have had a lot of salary compression over the last few years. We have approximately 700 paraprofessionals that have not been allowed to actually develop on salary schedule like we would hope they would be. Next slide. We believe that if we can go ahead and move on aligning the salaries with the experience, we can be competitive, and we also think that it's going to be value add around retention. Next slide. In terms of looking at student services salary alignment, last year we had moved homebound and SNAP hourly wages to $36 per hour. There was not the opportunity at the time to move additional hourly positions, but that has also become an issue of competitiveness in our region. In one of the critical areas in which we really need to impact the hourly rate is with the hourly speech pathologists. That is one of our positions that we're going to be concentrating on in the next year around recruitment, because right now we have several positions that we have not been able to fill, and we've been having to utilize agencies, and we want to make sure that we're closing that gap. So we want to be able to move the rest of the student services, related services hourly pay to $36 an hour. That would align all of the related services at this point. Slide. Are there any questions?
As you know, we've heard a lot of feedback from our employees wanting this. Do you feel like this does enough to address the concerns that have been brought to us? Or are there still areas that we need to be looking at? One step of many, or is this, we're really like closing the loop on it?
I think if we're speaking on paraprofessionals, I believe this is a beginning step. We intend to use the negotiations process to go deeper and even look at a more robust salary schedule for our paraprofessionals. But in the meantime, I want to make sure we're not going to lose anybody because they feel that they've not had the opportunity to be paid based on.
Any other questions? Dr. Cuneo, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do I have an motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you.